So Ana Agostino has been a social worker with a degree from the University of the Republic in Montevideo in Uruguay. And she's been a lecturer in development and culture also in Montevideo, and did her postgraduate studies at the University of Bremen, where she also got acquainted with post-development ideas, on which she later did her PhD. And the PhD was then from UNISA in South Africa. And her research focus is post-development, feminist political ecology, and human rights. She is a member of WIGO, the Women Ecology, Gender and Community Network, an international training network sponsored by the EU. And and we're happy that she is with us in Kassel as a visiting professor for post-development in our post-development research project. So Anna, thanks for being here. We're very happy to have you, and we're looking forward to listening to your lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm really happy to be here. Originally, I was invited in 2019, and the pandemic made it impossible to come. But the pandemic had many other consequences. I just want to say some of the things that happened in this time: an increase in extreme poverty and inequality, dismantling of social protection frameworks, loss of jobs and deterioration of working conditions, increase in violence in a variety of forms, including domestic violence and femicides, inequalities in the treatment and prevention of COVID-19 cases, appearances of new viruses, loss of rights, weakening of democracy, increased punitiveness, with higher impacts on migrants, people of color, women, and other minoritized populations. Plus war in Ukraine, but in many other regions of the world, some very long, complex, some more recent, with all the associated suffering, displacement, destruction. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees released at the end of May a report that shows that for the first time in record, more than 100 million people are refugees in these days. So if in 2019, with the project, when the project was written, there was a concern about the paradigmatic crisis in development theory, the current reality calls for radical and very innovative solutions to this situation, into what the project calls broadening the horizons. And precisely that is the idea that the project on post-development, the question is, how can post-development broaden the horizons to really achieve a life that is worth living? So in the midst of this very challenging reality, I am really thankful to Aram, to Julia, to Adriana, who are the members of the project, not just for the invitation, but for their own writings and for the possibility to be here exchanging concerns and hopes and thinking together about how we are really in a road to contribute to a better world. I wrote my PhD, as Adam said, in 2003 at the University of South Africa. And in these last 20 years, I've had the chance to continue doing research, but also to be involved in policies. I was the Defensora, public protector, or Ombudswoman. I will talk a bit more about what that means in the city of Montevideo. And that gave me the chance for 5 years, 2014 to 2019, to see to what extent these ideas of post-development can inform policies and practices on the ground. So I would be talking about that, but before I get there, I want to share what I understand are the key ideas of post-development. And I will then, once I present these ideas, I will then move to the practical applications, and at the end, I will just share some thoughts that we can expand on. So I believe that the main contribution of post-development is precisely the profound criticisms of development discourse. And I think that in the way that this criticism was formulated, open already possibilities to think otherwise. And I want to, I know many of you would know several of these criticisms. I want to concentrate on three. The first one is is precisely the invention of post-development, of underdevelopment. And I think that the main impact of the invention of underdevelopment is how it led a great part of humanity to perceive themselves as underdeveloped, and all the consequences that this self-perception had in the lives of, well, a great part of humanity. As you know, many of you know, the post-development writers put a start in the development discourse, which is the speech of President Truman in 1949, when he said, and that one is the text, we must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement of and growth of underdeveloped areas. More than half the people of the world are living in conditions approaching misery. Their food is inadequate, they are victims of disease, their economic life is primitive and stagnant, their poverty is a handicap and a threat both to them and to more prosperous areas. This idea, which was formulated more than 70 years ago, continues to make people feel like that, feel underdevelopment, refer to themselves as underdeveloped. That means of incapable of solving their own lives. But not only, with all the consequences, psychological, epistemological, economic consequences that self-perception as not having been able to live a better life has in people's lives. But also, it has made people who perceive themselves as being on the ones that are the model, feel entitled not just to tell the others what to do because they see their lives as a model, but to impose and intervene on their lives and make them move towards what is perceived as the right way to be. These hierarchical differences between human beings have tremendous impacts, as I said, in the self-perception and in the way people live their lives. But also it is an infringement on the dignity and the human rights of people. In the classical book of Rostow, The Stages of Economic Growth, a non-communist manifesto published in the 60s and that became a key piece in the development, the dominant mainstream development discourse, said that already in 1960. There is no doubt that without the affront to human and national dignity caused by the intrusion of more advanced powers, the rate of modernization of traditional societies would have been much slower. That is to say, development with a justification of helping people unable of helping themselves consciously affronted the dignity of human beings. And it is very important, this concept of dignity. I want to bring what a popular educator and philosopher from Uruguay, José Luis Revelato, wrote in 1998, talking about what dignity is. There is no fullness or dignity without self-determination. To live means for a person as for a people to be oneself, to realize oneself from within, to choose the meaning of one's existence, to build one's own identity, to open oneself autonomously to the others and the world. To have dignity is to demand recognition as subjects, to rediscover oneself, trust in our own abilities and potential to live and fight. Dignity is a fundamental value of an ethic of autonomy and liberation. That is to say, development, a call to finalize the civilizing mission of colonialism, represent a systematic denial of the agency inherent in the peoples of the South, of the global South. And I would like to emphasize the impact, both material as psychological and epistemological, of treating millions of human beings as incapable of denying their agency. And in the process, taking control of their lands, exploiting their resources, utilizing them for the benefits of the ones who conquered these territories. And that is why development came following colonialism with different means. But what I believe is that this affront on dignity, this denial of people's ability to be themselves, calls for reparations. And reparations is a topic that is isolated from the development discourse, but we cannot really talk about the development without really engaging on reparations. And if we think of what has happened after colonialism, that development and development aid are part of the generation and new forms of dependency, in particular through loans, and that have created another topic that is not usually analyzed in relation to development, which is the external debt crisis. I come from Latin America, and currently Latin America is the most indebted region, with the external debt averaging 77% of regional GDP. Therefore, a real process of reparation is long due, and it must contemplate material, financial reparations, as well as an apology, recognition of the damage caused, and symbolic reparation. So, as I said, development has led to a minoritization of millions of people around the world on the basis of a series of intersections, race, ethnicity, gender, ability, etc., etc. And to quote another Uruguayan, the author Eduardo Galeano, what he says is that this process was a call to be like them, because being oneself was being less. So development implies to resign to be oneself. And I would like to say that this has not only happened in relation to conquered peoples by colonialism, it happens within regions and within countries. And I want to mention the example of German unity as an example of how this also was part of this process. When German unity took place in 1990, a Treuhandstalt, a trust agency, was established as the process of how West Germany was going to incorporate East Germany. And this trust agency was mentioned as an example by Professor Ulrich Menzel in 1991 as a model to apply in the third world, which was the language of the time. He argued that the development aid was not working because the elites of the South were corrupt, because people were incapable of solving their own problems. And then at least countries in need of intervention from knowledgeable countries had to be created, where all the resources, all the expertise, and he said, even if military intervention is deemed necessary, it should go, reinforcing the inability of those on the other end not to solve their own problems. And in a way, East Germany was also seen as less developed by the West. And the expectation was that East Germans would become closer to how West Germans were. I was living in Bremen at the time, and I really remember how I was studying in Bremen, and there were courses to teach East Germans how to dress, how to walk, how to behave, how to do their hair. So it was an idea of differences between the East and the West, but not just differences, hierarchical differences. And that is part of the problem of the development discourse, which leads me to mention the next characteristic that I think is a main criticism of post-development, which is the denialism of diversity. Differences are an expression of our ontological particularities. And therefore, when post-development makes a call, citing Escobar, to move towards pluriverse, this requires a transition from the hegemony of the modern ontology of a single world to a pluriverse of social natural configurations. The right to difference requires overcoming a dualistic view of reality, mind, body, subject, object, human, non-human, etc. Because the dualistic view, and I cite Stefania Barkak, who in turn cites the ecofeminist Van Plumwood, says that this dualistic view is based on a hierarchical system of meaning that posits difference as natural and insurmountable separation, and with degrees of hierarchy, naturalizing the oppression of class, race, gender, nature, capacity, etc. One side is taken as naturally dominant and primary, while the other is defined in relation to it in terms of lacking those qualities. Domination on one side over the other is thus seen as inherent in the order of things. Therefore, I argue that progress and development have been about erasing the differences by transforming those in the so-called lower end to those in the dominant end, rather than reconstructing differences along non-hierarchical lines. And in that process, putting in danger also the identity of those people that are perceived as being in the lower end. And this endanger of identity was not just a denial of these forms of being, of producing, of living, or interacting with impact on those populations, but was also a loss of opportunity to those who think that they had in the dominant end to learn from these other experiences. So it was a denial for humanity as a whole to learn from each other. I have a quote from Silvia Federici that I'm going to make it shorter, but basically how the history of the disaccumulation of our pre-capitalist knowledge and capacities, learning how to live in relation with nature, finding orientations in the seas and in the sky, all that was a source of autonomy from those peoples and had to be destroyed to impose the development of capitalist industrial technology and build development. So what I say is that post-development has been key in highlighting how development played a role in this process of loss and denialism. And the third characteristic or criticism that I want to mention, and that is the one probably most well known, is the centrality of economic growth as part of the mainstream development discourse. I always say that development has a lot of surnames that were given to give it some form of legitimacy, local, sustainable, community, whatever. But in spite of all those surnames, development has remained economic growth. And the most important, I would say, effort when it came the Human Development Report for the first time in 1990 with the Human Development Index and the new variables to be able to identify the well-being and so on, nevertheless, economic growth remain as the key factor to be measured and to compare societies among each other. So by equalizing the economy with the market economy, so many dimensions that have to do with the well-being of peoples and societies got lost, and particularly people's dependency for their well-being on each other and on nature. And this was already brought as early as 1944 by Karl Polanyi in The Great Transformation, and it has been taken very strongly in the last decades by feminist economics, which I am going to go back to. So, very brief, those were the three main criticisms that I wanted to share with you, and I'm now going to move to how post-development played a role in making visible that there are other options. And as Boaventura de Sousa Santos has argued in the sociology of absence and the sociology of emergencies, it's not that there are no other possibilities. It's that they have been actively created as non-existent. That is to say, they are denied in their validity to present a real alternative to mainstream development. And therefore, he also argues that there is the sociology of emergencies, which the effort is to is a symbolic expansion of knowledge, practices, and agents seeking to identify and enhance possible future experiences that are expressed through trends and latencies. I think that post-development has played a key role in this symbolic expansion, showing possibilities of seeing and recognizing these trends and latencies and their potential to provide solutions, to provide alternatives different than the ones presented by development as the only possibility. So how has post-development done that? As I said, in 1993, I was studying in Bremen, and Gustavo Esteva came for a visit to the university and gave a series of talks. And then in one of his talks, he was asked, after development, what? And his answer was hospitality and attentiveness. And I see in these two concepts some of the key contributions that post-development have made to deepen the understanding of how and why these other ways provide real alternatives. Esteva said, I use the word hospitality. To be a host to others is not to follow them, to opt for them, or to affiliate your soul to them. It is just to acknowledge and respect the others, to be hospitable to them. In the dictionary, hospitality refers to friendly and liberal reception of guests and strangers. I have tried to understand, I have read quite a lot about the term, trying to understand, well, what is the meaning? How is it that this relates to the development discourse? Why is it important? And the Derrida says that usually hospitality is about receiving the one that I don't know, but with whom I might share language and everything that is associated to that language. And he says that is not really true hospitality. Radical hospitality means that I open my house to that one that I don't know at all, the absolute unknown, and that I don't ask anything. I just open my house to that person. And in the process, I also learn from that person. It's not these hierarchical roles again of the host that opens the house with all the rules that are associated to being the owner and possessing the materials that are there, and the host that has to accommodate. There is a breaking in this logic, and from a feminist perspective, a feminist view of hospitality subverts this hierarchical, these hierarchies associated with the possession of the house and the goods, by prioritizing connection between guest and host, replacing the idea that host gives and guest receives, by one in which both parties learn and grow together. And I think that this concept is the one that Esteva was talking about replacing development with hospitality. Now, very fast, I try to go as fast as I can because we have shorter time. So let's move now. If these are the main ideas and the main contribution of opening to other possibilities, what are the practical applications? And I want to say that I don't think there are practical applications of post-development. I think that development, the word development, has had the ability to capture the imagination, has had the ability to be able to say in one word everything that people would think about a good life. And because it means everything, it means nothing. And in the process, the mainstream concept of economic growth and all that is the one that filters. And at the end, if you say development, that is what you're saying. But there has not really been easy to find a replacement somehow to that word. I don't think that post-development is about replacing development. The problem is that with development as growth came also another word that has caught the imagination of people, which is sustainability. And then development is empty and sustainability is empty, and sustainable development means whatever you want to put in, but at the end of the day, again, is mainstream development. Let's continue with what we have done, but let's do it in a green way. So I have used many times to refer to sustainability, the ability to live within the limits of the physical environment now and indefinitely into the future. But this in turn requires that 4 dimensions, which is the environment itself, the economy, the social area, and the cultural dimension, they have to be considered in harmony in how they interact with each other and how they condition each other. There is nothing like economic sustainability, which is used a lot, not just economic sustainability, but sustainable growth, which is a contradiction in terms. So the language has given the opportunity to empty the real meaning of sustainability. And this is when I want to bring back the feminist economics and this criticism of equalizing the economy with its market form. Because in the process, as I said, everything that has to do with the reproduction of life, which is of course anchored in care and in relationality, has been erased from the economy. So I want to quote one of the feminist economics that has written on the sustainability of life, which is Cristina Carrasco, and she says, the analysis of the role of domestic work in the reproduction of the labor force work, the discovery of care and the idea of social reproduction allowed feminist economics to coin the concept of sustainability of life. A new perspective of analysis that situates, on the one hand, social reproduction as a fundamental aspect of the socioeconomic system, and on the other, care work as a determining aspect of social reproduction and of the living conditions of the population, displacing the social objective from obtaining benefits to the caring for life. And this opens new avenues for a possible change of the economic paradigm and in the applied field to the elaboration and implementation of new social actions and economic policies. So ecofeminism and feminist political ecology have highlighted this mutual dependency that human beings have among each other and with nature, and have called the attention of how the extractivist way in which we relate to nature and the centrality of the economy understood as the market are part of the reasons why sustainability in this concept is not possible. Therefore, calling to move to put life rather than the economy at the center, and we talk about the sustainability of life. So I would argue that when we talk about practical applications, we are talking about practical applications to reach sustainability of life. And then I move now to some concrete examples that happen in the Defensoría. Yeah, the Defensoría. I want to say a little bit because I know that not everybody knows what are these ombudsman or ombudspersons institutions that were originally established in Sweden in 1809, but it was not until the second half of the 20th century that many countries started having these institutions. And their role is basically to protect the people against violation of rights, abuse of powers, unfair decisions, and maladministrations. They operate by receiving complaints from citizens and making recommendations to governments. In Latin America, and we call them there Defensorías del Pueblo, the focus has been mainly on the promotion of human rights. It started, the Defensoría started in a region in the 80s when there were several authoritarian governments and there were even armed conflicts. And although it also had a control role of the state, the key was the strengthening of democracy through the participation of citizens and the defense of human rights. So, as I said, I was a defensora for 5 years in Montevideo, and the way we operate is, as I said, people present their concerns, we receive them, and then we are able to follow it up and present recommendations. But I want to say, following on the analysis of Arturo Escobar and Wendy Harcourt on politics of place, that the experience that leads to present the complaint encompasses 4 dimensions. The body, it is an embodied experience. The people are seeing in their neighborhood, in their city, the problems, they live them. The home, it goes beyond just one person, is the home, the neighborhood, the environment at large, in the social public space. So on a daily basis, what we were seeing in the Defensoría were examples of individuals, mainly women. I must say that more than 60% of the complaints are presented by women, who on their daily lives are qualifying global processes. So from their body experience of what is missing, of what is not functioning, they develop a sense of what should happen in their own communities, and not just complain, but come with an idea of how things should be. Although, and I'm skipping some things, but although many people come to the Defensoría claiming I have the right to a clean sidewalk, I have the right to sanitation, or to place these demands within the framework of the understanding of what does it mean in urban, environmentally friendly, just and equitable program to secure that cities are livable and that life is at the center. And that is the role of the Defensoría, together with the people who present their complaints. So I put there, you can put the next one, just some few examples of policy recommendations that we presented based on this presentation that people make to us. And I want to say that although they might seem that they are not related, I would argue that these different situations relate to what people understand that has to do with social, cultural, ecological, and economic aspects of people's and communities' lives, but they also reflect the tensions that are in a city, in a state, which are usually part of the contestation of space. And I can put some examples, for example, job generation vis-a-vis environmental protection, or in free and open green space vis-a-vis the circulation of cars, and there would be others. But I think that these tensions are also an expression of the dualistic view that it tends to be resolved again within the framework of the centrality of the economy. Because if job generation and environment come in tension, it will go the economy. We have to secure jobs. Rather than saying, okay, let's think collectively in which way we can find solutions that are negotiated, that are part of an expression of how people understand their lives, how they want to live their lives, how they want to share their common space. So not all our recommendations were taken, but I must say that we went through very interesting experiences with some of the topics. I'm not going to address any of those. I'm going to concentrate on 2 concrete cases. One is on abandoned houses, and the other one is on sanitation. The abandoned houses starts by the complaint of some, as I said, usually women, vecinas, we call them, who come to the Defensoría because there is a problem in their neighborhood. There is an abandoned house, and that generates a series of problems that have to do with public health concerns, with security concerns, with concerns for children that are maybe living in occupied homes, and all the associated problems. On the basis of these things, the Defensoría did a research to say, okay, in the central city, what is the understanding of abandonment, to conceptualize abandonment, and to identify how many abandoned houses were in the central part of the city. Leave it there, don't. Now, it must be said that houses are abandoned, among other reasons, because owners do not fulfill the duties that are associated with the right to ownership. And this duty has to do with use, conserve, protect environment, diversity, protect cultural heritage, and other things. So, okay. So, it is also associated with the entitlement that private owners feel that they are given just because they own property. But we did this research, and it was found that 339 houses were abandoned. And then a working group was formed with other organizations from government and from civil society, and objectives were set to contribute towards public projects and programs to find integral solutions to the precarious occupation of abandoned houses, transform irregular occupied public space into space recovered for the city, and favor social inclusion, etc. The government of Montevideo followed on that and created also a program which led, after some time, to recover some of these abandoned houses, and the uses that were given to some of these houses were a halfway house that provides transitory stay space for populations that face different forms of human rights violations like domestic violence, homelessness, institutionalization, etc. Trans house. This is a recreational and cultural community space for people in the process of gender change, and is currently under construction, and is going to be managed by civil society groups that promote the rights of transgender population. Dispersed cooperatives, that is housing cooperatives that are not sequenced one next to the other, they are dispersed in the city, but the idea is that to recover these spaces and provide the opportunity to people to remain in the neighborhood and live in the central of the city. In another project, there's a feminist co-housing that is run by older women that want to do this experience of living according to the desires, needs, and interests of, in particular, women that are now retired, and they call themselves women with history. They have committed themselves also not just to have a housing proposal, but to be in constant interaction with the groups in the neighborhood. In summary, to finalize this one, from the complaints of women who care for the well-being of their families, neighborhood, and beyond, to a public program that puts life at the center, offering houses and communal solutions to a variety of situations, displacing the centrality of ownership and capital, and having people's participation at the center. Very briefly, these things can also happen because you have people in government who are sensitive to these views that I had mentioned are joined by post-development. The other example is sanitation, okay? I'm going to go fast through a sanitation example, but I want to say that Montevideo is a city that covers 92% of its population with sanitation services. It's one of the cities in Latin America with the highest coverage. But nevertheless, this 8% that do not have sanitation through the sewage system have problems, usually in relation to the overflow of cesspools and the associated health and environmental problems. We receive a lot of complaints in relation to sanitation, made several recommendations, but then it was clear that it was an urgent need to find solutions. And we work with the academia, with government, with civil society, with people in the neighborhoods, and did research on alternative systems that have proven to be very effective for the function of sanitation, which is the disposal of domestic effluents. It can be through the system, the big one that you see here, or it can be through these environmentally friendly sanitation systems. So we made a recommendation. We worked hard with also the Faculty of Engineering and with people who had done it in their own homes and so on, after proving that this would work. And we recommended the government of Montevideo to implement transitory solutions with these environmentally friendly and community-proven solutions, while at the same time continue with the efforts towards the sewage system with a network. And I must say we were very happy with this recommendation because it had been a communal effort. And so shortly after we presented that recommendation, I was told that a woman in the neighborhood, asked the intendente, it's like the governor of Montevideo, asked the intendente not to listen to my recommendation. She only wanted the sewage system through the big connection. And I believe that this is a clear example, this desire for mainstream solutions, this desire not to be treated with alternatives, relates to what Wolfgang Sachs wrote in the preface to the new edition of the Development Dictionary in 2009. Looking at the Development Dictionary today, it is striking that we had not really appreciated the extent to which the development idea has been charged with hopes for redress and self-affirmation. So this desire for development, this desire for industrial solutions, the desire not to be treated with alternatives. There is currently a very strong political debate in Montevideo around the funds, whether the funds are going to come for the sewage network. But those other sanitations that are equally adequate for the correct disposal and treatment of human waste have been actively created as non-existent. That is, as non-viable solutions, not just for the officials, but also for ordinary people and their imagination. So, to close the presentation and move to some ideas for debate. I share some of what I think are the key criticisms of post-development. I shared how the post-development played a key role in showing that there are other ways of doing things and how these ones can, these other visions, these other understandings, these other forms of inhabiting and relating to each other, to nature, can also inform policies. I know it is, the examples I brought are from municipal and departmental, we say, policies, which is a level, is the second and third tier of government, which tends to have more participation than other levels. But reading some of Julia's writings, she also talked about how post-development challenges EU policymaking. And she says that it requires the EU to go beyond the decade-old rhetoric on equal partnership and engage in a real dialogue with countries and communities in the global south about alternatives to development. It also requires the EU to recognize development policy as part of a broader intervention that needs transformation. She calls for a discussion on reparations to former colonized countries that could be fostered at EU level. And it would also require that the EU to fight the existing power asymmetries by forcing structural reforms in global governance at WTO, World Bank, IMF, and others. That is to say, the multilateral level of policies can also be informed by these views. So, post-development tends to be seen as relating to practices and visions on the margins, from the cracks, radical gestures, more or less testimonial. I would not argue that any of these transformative initiatives, as they are named in the post-development dictionary, have universal validity. But what I would argue is that if policies generate an enabling environment for their implementation, addressed to those that find in these other ways solutions, they realize that their well-being is at the center and that they're contributing to a just, equitable, and sustainable life, then these other forms would also be seen in a different light. not as mere alternatives in the margins for those who cannot have other possibilities, but as part of the various parts that are possible and that can be considered equally and with the same value. For that to happen, it does require changes at various levels. One of them precisely the policy field, the questions around the states, mechanisms for people participation, and so on. I think that these examples show that it is possible to put people at the center. In Uruguay and the former government, also at the national level, a national system of care was created as a result of many years of work by the feminist movement and other organizations. So there are examples where life has been put at the center in the policies, and it has improved people's life conditions. And I would argue also that universities have a key role to play in analyzing these processes, bringing together different actors, crossing borders between academia, activism, and politics, overcoming hierarchies, and also being hospitable in terms of where and how knowledge is generated, which can contribute to broadening the horizons towards well-being and towards sustainability in its broad and deep sense, that is, again, putting the sustainability of life at the center. So